Well, kia ora koutou, everyone. Welcome to this webisode. We'll be discussing about the vital importance of native forests to New Zealand and to the world. I'm Vincent Heringer, and I'm the host of Our Regenerative Future Season 2, O Tātou Ngāhere, or Our Forest, and it's produced by Pure Advantage and Tane's Tree Trust. And also these webisodes, we're very grateful for the collaboration of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. Over the past year, Pure Advantage and Tane's Tree Trust have taken a deep dive into the regeneration of native forests as a source of natural, spiritual and economic value. We've had so much momentum and dialogue around this series, which we're really grateful for and excited about. And these conversations, we hope to spark some cross-sector dialogue and get people thinking about the potential for native forests in a regenerative and restorative economy. In today's webinar, we'll be looking at the current state of New Zealand's native forests, the major issues that threaten them, and the potential opportunities for change and growth. And I'll be joined in this by a superb panel of three experts: Professor Warwick Sylvester of Waikato University and also of Tane's Tree Trust, Ramona Radford from Scion, and Sheridan Ashford, the co-founder of Future Foresters. In a second, I'll let these fine folk introduce themselves, but just some housekeeping. We're very happy to take your questions. Simply add them to the chat, and I'll do my best to put them to the panelists if there's time, and there should be time. We've allowed time for it. We'll be finishing at 7:30, but that doesn't mean you have to. There's a ton of great material for you to read on our website. That's pureadvantage.org, pureadvantage.org. And you can follow us on any of your favorite social media channels, except perhaps TikTok. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And of course, we'll be back again next Tuesday for the second in the 7-part series. Right, well, to our guests, I'd really like to for you to be introduced to our guests. They're going to tell them a bit about themselves. So they're going to tell us who they are, what they do, and why forests matter to them. And Ramona, maybe we could start with you. Kia ora. Thank you for joining us. Who are you? What do you do?
Kia ora, Vince. Nice to see everyone. Sorry, I've got a poll on my screen. I'm just going to take that off there. Ko kapua rangi te maunga, kei uta ki rangi ahua, ko tainui waka, ko ngai tai iwi, ko tōrere nui arua te marae. So I'm Ramona Radford. My people are from the Eastern Bay of Plenty. I work at Scion and have been the lead of Te Ao Māori capability and Māori partnerships here. Scion is a Crown Research Institute that has a mandate for research, science and innovation for forests, including standing forests or ngāhere. My greatest achievement is that I am a nanny. Why forests matter so much to me and the world that I belong to. Is that something that you want me to talk about now, Vince? Or
well, we're going to come back to your role as a nanny. That sounds very interesting. But I suspect what you wanted to say is that they matter to you and to your mokopuna.
Absolutely. 100%. To me and my mokopuna, to me and my people, to me and the world that I belong to. They're so important for so many reasons. So I'll come back to the reasons explore that why later.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Kia ora. Thank you, Ramona. Warwick, over to you. What do you do in regards to forests and why do they matter to you?
Well, firstly, just to reiterate, I've been retired from the university for 12 years. So that's a bit behind me, but I still seem to carry that epithet. Our Tane's Tree Trust has been a mission for me because Rob McGowan and I had coffee one day. Some of you may know Pa McGowan, Rob, and we sat down and said, this was in the year 2000, and we'd been observing the way in which native forests suddenly had been exploited, but suddenly were totally closed down. The conservation movement had effectively reduced any activity within the forest, and they were closed down. So we thought there's got to be another view. We've got to look at forests in all of their values. We've got to look at all of the values that forests provide. And so a group of us got together, we had a seminar, and we formed Tāne's Tree Trust. We'll talk a little bit more about Tāne's Tree Trust later on. But I've worked scientifically in forests for a long time. I've worked a lot on nutrient cycling. I've worked with kauri quite a lot. And I have a feeling in forests that I find is spiritual. When I'm in a forest, I feel an affection for the environment that it creates in me and with the forest itself. So there's more to than just the science for me. I am the chairman of a trust which manages 100 acres of bush outside of Hamilton, where we've taken a fairly trashed piece of bush and we've turned it into a wonderful piece of lowland forest. And that really turns me on.
Well, kia ora, Warwick. Thank you for sharing that. And you know what they say about professors, it's like the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. Sheridan, tell us about your work and tell us a little bit about Future Foresters, and we will come back in greater detail. But tell us now, who are you and why do forests matter to you?
Okay, cool. Thanks, Vincent. I work in commercial plantation, exotic forestry. That's my day job. I'm a trained forester, but I guess kind of why I'm here is I'm part of a group that started the Future Foresters New Zealand, and we're really passionate about the next generation of foresters and spreading the word, getting more people involved in forestry, because I feel like it's this thing in New Zealand that nobody really knows exists. And we want more people to know what it is. We want people to know the benefits. We sort of want to help tell that story to the generations that are coming through at the moment. And also, what will that look like in the future is sort of what turns me on, like what I said.
And not just for native forests, but exotics as well.
All forestry, yeah. I think it's just this part of our landscape that not enough New Zealanders know anything about.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for the brief introductions. Warwick, I might start with you. I want to know more about the state of our native forests, because we have the sense that there is a conservation estate, but is that conservation estate in peril? Is it big enough? And what kind of health is it in? Can you give us a kind of a 101 on the state of our native forests?
Well, in addressing that, there are two aspects to this. One is the quantity, the other is the quality. Let's address the quantity first of all. New Zealand, prior to the arrival of humans, was about 80% forest. There's very good records of that. When Europeans arrived here, there was about 50% cover of the country as in forest. Today, we've got 30%. So we have lost an enormous amount of forest. So in terms of quantity, we've lost a lot. And most of that, of course, is in the high country. Of course, most of it's in the conservation estate. But I started to look at countries which have less forest in them than we do. They're remarkably few. Well, those that do, you find they're either deserts. Australia's only got 17% of its country in forest. And you can mention why that is. You can't grow forests in the desert. Sudan, for example, is 18. The UK, of course, which has been almost essentially deforested, is only 12% of forest. But when you compare New Zealand with other areas, take Japan, which is a country of similar size, although 120 million people, to support 120 million people on a country which is a bit bigger than New Zealand. Have a guess how much they've got in forestry. 67% of that country is under forest. They seem to be able to do it. People say you can't afford to feed yourself unless you have a land under grass. That's not true. So the history of New Zealand is we've essentially deforested all of the low country and turned it into grass. So that's the quantity business. The quality is another one. because the quality, of course, has also gone downhill because we have introduced into our forest a number of exotic animals, predators of various sorts, weeds. We've allowed grazing into our forests. In fact, many farms have winter grazing inside a bunch of forest, and the piece of forest that I manage is exactly like that. We've got rid of the animals. We've actually transformed, for 15 years, we've transformed that forest. We have planted 9,000 trees amongst it, and we've got another 1,000 to go in actually next month. Oh, I digress. So we have decimated the amount of forest. We've actually ruined a lot of the habitat. I could go into that at great length, but I think there's an essential summary.
And that forest that does exist, the main threats would be from what? From further deforestation, or is it from pests?
Mainly from pests. I was just a few days ago in Doubtful Sound, and we were looking at the map, and we could see Secretary Island, an island that's had all of the predators taken off it, and it's a wonderful example of what forest can be like. There are increasing examples, and then 3 days later, I had a night walk in Zealandia. And, you know, the fence area in Wellington, a night walk, absolutely fantastic, 2 hours in this forest in the middle of the night. Within 4 minutes, we saw 2 kiwi. And then a few minutes later, we saw 2 tuatara, and so on went on. If you go into places like that, Zealandia and other places that where predators have been removed, you see what the transformation has been brought about. It's very, very obvious.
Ramona, when you think about how much of our ngāhere has been lost, what has been lost in the process? You know, what makes our forests so special, you know, so unique in the world? And when you think about the loss, you know, what does that actually mean?
Well, to Te Ao Māori, the natural world was birthed through a process. Ko te kore, the potential in the void. So there was this potential in a space of nothingness. Nā te kore te pō, the form in the darkness began to take shape. Ki te whai ao, to the glimmer of dawn. Ki te ao mārama, to the bright light of day. Te hei mauri ora, there is life. During this time, the earth and the sky were formed and came into being. Ko rangi nui ka moe ia papatu anuku ka puta ki waho. Ko tāne nui a rangi. So rangi nui and papatu anuku, sky and earth, gave birth to the forest and many other things at that point. So this is a narrative, obviously, from Te Ao Māori. And inside this birthing process, there were many phases and stages. So this narrative acknowledges that the natural world evolved over time. And as a reminder, it keeps us as tangata whenua humble. And it reminds us to walk gently upon the earth. And it also rehumanizes us to our environment. So what does the ngāhere mean to Te Ao Māori? As a word, ngāhere is 2 ideas combined. Combined, they mean the binding of the many. So the binding of the many trees, you could say, the binding of the many ecosystems, the binding of the different worlds, both the human and the natural world, the binding of earth and sky. But the ngāhere to Te Ao Māori is a self-supporting system of life. So it's a single system that is connected to sky and to earth. And it's not one, you know, those aren't 3 things to the Indigenous people of the globe. Those are the same thing, and we as humans are a part of that whole. So when I think of what the ngāhere means to me, I imagine the great mana, or experiencing the great mana of the primordial rainforest that once existed here, and covered the land, and the effect of that single living organism, the forest, on the land and the waterways, the cycles of energy and evaporation, and the transpiration, sorry, I'm reading some of this, that ebbed and flowed with the seasons, with the sun and the moon, and moved in the space between sky and earth across generations. And this was the experience of the first peoples to this land. This was the experience that they had. And that great forest, as Warwick has said, is no more. There are only remnants of what once was. So pūrākau narratives and waiata told by descendants of the first people are the only living memories that remain of those first primordial forests. So to Te Ao Māori, the ngahere is everything. It's our teacher, it's our teaching curriculum, it's our food basket, it's our medicine cupboard, it's you know, as we know, it's become understood as the lungs of the earth. So the ngahere to Te Ao Māori is everything.
It's interesting, Warwick, that so many of the ideas captured in what Ramona's just talked about, and also this idea of Māori, the connection of things together in one, I suppose, interconnected network, is coming back as a science idea and as an economic idea, isn't it? And you had this beautiful phrase, think like a forest. Can you expand on that a little bit? And it seems to me that think like a forest captures also some of the sentiments that are expressed in those legends.
Right, I'd like to just follow on from Ramona and use the word taio, because that's the word that captures all of this, the Māori word taio. I hope my pronunciation's okay, Ramona. Taio. Not taiho, which means slow down. Taio is the word which captures exactly what you're saying there, Vince, because what that says is that the forest and is a combination of a whole lot of things. And in fact, in European terms, it was the term oikos. It's a Greek word, which has become ecology, and which says that the natural systems are a combination of the soil, the water, the climate, and the organisms that in it. And this is the word taio. Ties that all together, and has been a word that's been used in Māori culture for a long time, and is essentially the same as the word ecology that we use today. It's fascinating that they've got them both. And I want to refer to something that Kiri Allen has spoken about in a few minutes, because I think it's essential for us to consider that.
Sheridan, when you think about native forests, Ngāti, as a young person, I think you've mentioned this to me before, being part of the conservation estate has meant that it's kind of over there. It's something else that is kind of sequestered away. Sequester is probably the wrong word in this climate change times, but you know, it is something that's kind of behind a fence, isn't it? And what the challenge is, from what Tane's Tree Trust is saying, is actually let's bring it forward, let's bring it into industry. Can you explain from a young person's point of view, how did you perceive native forests?
I guess at university, I graduated relatively recently. Apart from, I think, a few papers in first year, native forestry probably wasn't part of our learning, because as far as like a professional forester is concerned, that native forestry is locked up. You know, it's not for foresting to us. So getting involved with Pure Advantage and learning more about Tane's Tree Trust, and even just listening to Ramona talk, it's sort of, it gives me so many more feelings about the forest, and it's so much more than I think that we learn about in our professional degrees at university. Yeah.
That's interesting. And you mentioned when we were first talking, the idea of actually harvesting native trees seemed like a foreign concept to you.
Yeah, I mean, we learn about selective harvesting. We've been to this great beech forest in North Canterbury. There's one place that does it, and that's all I've really ever heard about being able to do that continuous cover selective foresting.
Yeah.
Well, let's just go to Europe and see where it's been done for the last 500 years. And we've learned a lot from them.
Yeah.
Continuous cover forestry is a well-researched, well-known method of dealing with forest. Unfortunately, in New Zealand, we had this wonderful resource, which was there waiting for us to cut down. And we got stuck into it, didn't we? There's some awful stories. I was reading one today about the 50,000 acres of forest that was burnt down in the Northland in one fire. We got rid of it big time because we had to put grass in.
I think,
Ramona.
Yes.
In the Forest Act, it talks about, I think in the Forest Act, you know, that's what the Indigenous forestry defines, I guess, Indigenous forestry for in as far as New Zealand is concerned. And in that act, that was written at a time, 1949, at which during which New Zealand realised and suddenly recognised that there was no forest, or there was very little forest left, and that there needed to be a rethink about how we treated these ngahere, or the remnants of what was once the great forest of Tāne, or Te Waunea Tāne. And I think about the use of the word forestry when we refer to the ngahere. And as an Indigenous person, that kind of gives me, you know, it kind of makes me feel a little uncomfortable when we refer to it as forestry.
Can you explain?
My preference is that, you know, we talk about things like tree farms if we're going to be planting plantations or new plantations, that we talk about things like tree farms rather than forestry. So tree farms for purposes that may extend beyond the current notion of what forestry is, because we've built an industry here that you know, that is built on the colonial model of a forest, and that colonial model is resource focused. It's about taking resources and creating wealth from those resources. So when I think about the future of what our ngahere could offer in the way of an economic return, I like to think of it rather than being profit driven, because I don't think our ngahere should be profit driven. I think it should be, definitely profit needs to be part of an equation. But if it is profit driven, then I think it loses its special essence. It loses its ability to do all of those intangible and tangible things that you know, we all talked about in the opening minutes of this webinar. And I think as a nation, we really need to think about our cultural identity when it comes to our forests, and that cultural identity, I think, needs to be yes, we've done some very interesting things with radiata pine and other species. I think that cultural identity should envelop that, but there should be a very special part of that cultural identity set apart for ngahere, and we should treat it specially, you know, as a result.
You use the word wealth, and wealth in its biggest sense would still capture that. But what if I can interpret what I thought you were saying, I think you were saying you were talking about a very narrow definition of wealth around financial returns and this sort of singular focus on just cutting down as much as you can to get a higher financial return. And what you talked about at the beginning was an understanding of wealth in a much bigger sense, in a full ecological and a spiritual sense also.
Yeah, a holistic approach to wealth.
Yes.
The context that I led, you know, into this part of the discussion was around colonization, and the idea of colonization was to go to the nethermost parts of the world and then send those whatever resources you were to find there back to the motherland to support the motherland. And I think we need to move away from that as a nation. We need to kind of redefine ourselves. You know, at some point, somebody thought this as the Antipodes, this in Australia as the Antipodes, the nethermost parts from the motherland. I think, you know, we're 200 years later and we're still operating as a nation on that model. And when we're thinking about ngahere, tree farms, Indigenous forestry, I'd like us to think about what that means. And
what does that mean for you, Warwick? You talk about the full benefits of native forests. So tell us, you know, expand. What are the full benefits of
There are a whole lot of points there, Ramona, I'd like to take up on. The first one is that Maori, right from the very beginning, did continuous cover forestry in the ngahere. They would take a tree out, make a canoe out of it. They would take saplings out and build buildings. They treated it as continuous cover forestry, if you like. And you've got to believe that. That's what happened. And this is exactly what we advocate for. There are so many values. One of our members has just written a paper, it's just being published right now. It's 100 pages long, which talks about the non-timber values of native forests. There have been attempts to value those in dollar terms. I have attempted to stop people doing that because the moment you do that, someone's going to find a problem with it. But you can value it in subjective terms and say, how much do you value this forest for whatever value you'd like to see in it? And that may be landscape. It may be heritage values. It may be, you're putting this forest in for your grandchildren. It may be for water quality. It may be for soil quality, all sorts of things. There are hundreds of things. We advocate, right from the very beginning, we said, we have in New Zealand some of the best softwood timbers of the world. We value them for those properties. We should use them for whatever properties they are valued for, because we take the wrong way out of the forest. We take food from the forest. Why don't we take trees from the forest in such a way that the ngahere retains all of its other properties? We've actually done 3 trial loggings of totara in the north, which do exactly that. And a year after those trees have been taken out, you can't see where they were taken from. So it is possible to do this. And right from the beginning, Tane's Tree Trust said the way to get people to actually value forest is to ask them what are all the values, which includes the value of the timber. And if they're able to take that value out, then well and good. So that's continuous cover forestry. I could go on.
We're living at a time
from the beginning.
We're obviously living in a climate crisis.
Yes.
What is the contribution, and Ramona or Sheridan perhaps, what's the role of native forestry in addressing climate change? What capacity does our native forest have for sequestering carbon, for instance?
I'll let Sheridan answer first, and then I can back her up, if that's okay.
Yeah, I guess for me, in that sort of ideal world, it's the long-term solution for sequestering carbon for climate change forever, basically. You know, it's sort of the slower build, but after that, it's kind of those trees are going to be on the land for a longer time, and in terms of climate change, and then not only like offsetting, but they're going to continue to be in our landscape forever. Like, we're not just trying to offset emissions anymore, we'll just be actively sequestering that carbon forever.
Yeah.
And that's native forests, and that's not the current exotic forestry model that we have.
The interesting thing is that New Zealand hasn't been able to quantify the sequestering capability of native trees to this point. And Sion, who's
we have. I'm sorry, we have.
Well, finish that thought, Ramona, and then we'll come back to Warwick.
I'm not quite finished with that. I'm talking in terms of the ETS, and the ETS and its ability to quantify the sequestering capability of trees as a tool, I guess, for climate change mitigation. And one of the things we had an ETS workshop here, well, not a workshop, a regulations review with Te Ao Māori a couple of weeks ago here. And one of the things that came through quite strongly was the message that ngahere is an intergenerational solution. It's a solution that could last 800 years, and that, yes, radiata pine and potentially other exotic species might grow faster in the short term. But if we're thinking about the generations to come and about the world that we're trying to prepare for, or prepare the foundations for, then we need to look intergenerationally. And this again is a failing, I might put it that way, of our view of forests, our national view of forests, our accepted national view of forests, is that forests are things that you put in the ground and then you cut them down at 27 or 30 or 50 years, and then they grow back. Well, there is another type of forest that lasts a longer time, that does take a little while to ramp up and get going, but once it does, it has the potential to provide an intergenerational climate change mitigation for our nation and for the world. And I think what's here is an opportunity for New Zealand to show the world, other parts of the colonized world, how to do this. We've got an opportunity to redefine the benefits of forestry and Indigenous species. Warwick.
Tani's Tree Trust has produced a carbon calculator, which is based on by far the biggest data set of native forests, far bigger than Forest Research ever had. It's been generated by our own staff. We've produced a carbon calculator, which is based on real data. We know exactly how much carbon the trees can, but unfortunately, the lookup tables produced by MPI were produced on a very narrow set of very young trees. And we know that native trees grow very slowly when they're young. So we have two data sets. The MPI lookup tables for ETS actually do not do justice whatsoever to the potential of native forests to sequester carbon. Let me give you an example, and this is a real world example. Trees like kauri and totara, and even possibly rimu, but particularly those two, when they get up and going after about 20 or 30 years, can be putting on between 12 and 18 cubic meters of timber a year per hectare. And of course, we've been blindsided by radiata. At the same time, radiata is putting on 30 or 40. And so having been blindsided by radii, we can't see past it. We can't see that in the long term, our native forests are going to hold up much more carbon, and it will go on doing it for 300 or 400 years. And let's compare what we've done in New Zealand to what the average rate of forest production in North America with the softwoods there is about 14. And kauri and totara will do exactly that. So we're right up there. Our problem is that radiata is something right out way beyond virtually anything else in the world. So we've got to come back to reality. And one of the things that we in Tane's Tree Trust have been trying to emphasize is the heritage value of forests, the long-term benefits. Farmers are getting it. Unfortunately, our farms turn over once every 10 years. That's a pity. But there are heritage values for the long term.
Hi, Katie Tika. I would say that science has a role to play in advancing the ability of our native species to help in the climate, the climate issue. Science applied to nature can help to accelerate, I guess, the rate of sequestration. So the same science that has been applied to radiata pine can essentially be applied to our native species. So there is a lot of hope there, and the regulators or the decision makers about what species to plant where, I think are starting to understand and open their minds to the wider possibility of what Ngāhere can offer to our nation, and those full range of benefits that you talked about, Warwick, both the tangible and the intangible, are so important. And they identify us as a nation. Radiata pine, yes, that's a story that we can tell as a nation, but as a New Zealander, I'd like to back a tree that is endemic from this land, and just the way it lights up people. When we talk about Ngāhere, people just light up.
Yeah.
So there's so many good
Great
reasons.
question here from one of our participants. Keith Dark from Tasmania is saying that Tasmania has fantastic forests as well, quite incredible stands of forest, but our state government, this is from Keith, our state government seems intent to develop tourism ventures over retaining our natural asset in an undeveloped state. How is New Zealand managing these development pressures? Do any of you have a point of view about the impact that ecotourism has, both positive and negative, on our native forests?
I know that the government is trying to balance the landscape values against the heritage values. There are the way they're classifying land and what you can plant on land speaks to that. There is a commitment to ensuring that our distinctive landscapes remain, and that we are making a conscious decision about what to plant where. I think we've got a little way to go, though. I think that there are other voices that need to be heard. Tane's Tree Trust is one of those. Farm Foresters Association, Māori, and just your general New Zealander, I think need to be engaged in that conversation. This climate change strategy, which is on its way, and we all know it's coming, is responsible for a change in a lot of policy. The RMA is going to be replaced by a number of different things. The ETS, the way we treat biodiversity and indigenous species, conservation, I think you'll find will kind of start to disappear from the language, and we'll start to use more holistic, more New Zealand specific terms to describe things. I think if I were able to influence the state government over there in Australia, I would say that they should listen to their people. They should definitely listen to the Indigenous people, and they should definitely listen to their citizens and their people. You know, just the general, those communities of practice that are passionate about ensuring the survival of biodiversity and endemic species, because when we remove these species off the landscape, then a little bit of our identity and our culture and our heritage goes with that.
Comes back to this holistic, integrated, all the benefits seen as in their whole sense, not just the individual. And you know, carbon sequestration again is kind of one of those. It's a vertical, isn't it? And seen on its own, you would send you down a path of ignoring the benefits of forests as a whole. And all of which was a way of saying we got a great question here from Dame Anne Salmond, who has joined our korero. And she's saying, do we really understand how native forests, not just native trees, sequester carbon? Everything in the Ngāhere works together, including the fungal communities underground. As far as I know, there has been very little whole of forest research into carbon sequestration in Aotearoa that inquires into all the elements of the Ngāhere, including the plants and fungal communities. Is that true, that we don't have a sense of what's above and what's below?
Well, having done that very thing for kauri forest, I think we do have some understanding of that. The underground fungal activity, of course, is enormous. It's not being sequestered, just being redistributed down there. The sequestering site is the leaf. But then, of course, the storage of carbon in the kauri forest is absolutely staggering. You've got a leaf litter layer that's up to 2 meters deep, and it's just loaded with carbon.
Right.
And it's at a pH of 2.8, it's not going to lose its carbon very quickly. So yes, we have an understanding. In some of our old podocarp forests, there's been some beautiful work done in the South Island by Alan Mark and his people on the total carbon storage there. So I think we do have an understanding, and translating overseas work to our own forests, I think, gives us a pretty good understanding of that. But can I just touch on the question that you just posed, the previous question? I've taken visitors to this country to Rimu Forest, to Matai Forest, to Kauri Forest, and they're absolutely bowled over by it. It is a magical experience for them, and you can turn it into one for them by talking about the Ngāhere. And if it's done by local iwi, it has another dimension to it, which actually can be a wonderful tourist experience, and we must capitalize on that. I think we have a great opportunity, and that's what you said, Ramona, in Tasmania. If they did it that way, you would add enormous value to that tourist experience.
Yeah, so it's not one or the other, it's a plus. It's an and.
Seems to be critical. Well, there's a good question here, and this might be one for you, Sheridan, about what does success look like in terms of, I don't know, this question's about total forest cover. You know, if we're down to 30%, what percentage looks like a good number to get to? But that perhaps is one version of a bigger question, which is what what does success look like overall? And you've written a great piece in the whole series about what the future looks like. So tell us what, 100 years from now, when you're bouncing a mokopuna on your knee, by some miracle, you'll be 121.
I guess when I look at the future with this sort of blue sky thinking, what I would love to see the future look like is that whole change of values and profits that goes along with what Warwick and Ramona are talking about, that people understand that, this money thing isn't what's going to make you happy,
just a little bit happy.
Wow. There's but just the whole understanding of it. So, what will make you happy is fresh air, clean water, a beautiful surrounding when you walk out your front door, when you go down the road, when you do have your mokopuna with you and you're going out to go biking or just go for a walk through the forest. What will New Zealand look like? I mean, I hope that we can sort of keep working towards changing people's perceptions around, what they value from their environment. And basically, I think that needs to start yesterday. The longer we leave not prioritizing natives in the landscape and where they fit. I mean, what would it look like right now if we'd put the same sort of investment into natives in terms of research and money that we did with radiata?
Yeah, 100%.
Over to you, Sion.
We should start.
Can do it.
We should start with putting native forest into the headwaters of every stream.
Yeah.
It's steep country, and this is where it starts. If you look at the video that we've turned out, and you'll see Ian Brennan drinking water in the stream that he has revegetated with native forest. He's taken his high country, he's got 6 streams which originate on his property. He's creating a native forest in every one of those upper catchments. They're quite steep, but he's doing a brilliant job. And I think that would be an aim to start with, to revegetate the headwaters. They're not much use for anything else, really, as far as stock are concerned. They're very steep, but they erode so quickly, and that's where our sediment's coming from.
And I think, coming back to Sheridan's vision for the future, and what she's talking about there, I think, is a redistribution of wealth, a redefinition of what wealth is, would be one thing, and a redistribution of wealth, I think, would go a long way to New Zealand being able to, to set up a future for our mokopuna, one that they want to be a part of. And what does that redistribution of wealth look like? It starts with, planting at the headwaters, but iwi or iwi Māori, I'll say, mana whenua, don't even have the resources right now to replant the lands that have been degraded. So I think there needs to be a recalibration of many things, something along the lines of what Sheridan's talking about in terms of shared values. We need to look at what New Zealand stands for as a nation, and then recalibrate according to that. And yes, there's an economic equation, there always has to be, but should it be the central point of all decisions? Is GDP the only thing that we should measure well-being by? All of that stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, going to the point about the land that is steep, unfarmable, has previously been called kind of wasteland, and that, I know that's something that Māori really resist, isn't it, Ramona? Because what's wasteful about a hilltop?
Well, we generally, the Indigenous thinkers, in Te Ao Māori would also resist the idea of fighting climate change. You know, I think if we were to think of the natural world as having its own ability to manage itself and to renew and revitalize and reinvigorate itself, I think the only thing we as a human race need to do is manage our impact on the landscape, on the land. And if we are able to do that, then I think we get a very different result. And when you think about things like how we manage the impacts of erosion, etc. What about just retiring spaces? You know, the idea of retiring spaces into permanent forest. What's wrong with that?
It's happening naturally in the north. Over 100,000 hectares of hill country land that was farmed 30 years ago when the subsidies came off, it was not economic, so farmers walked away. What happened? It became a manuka forest. The birds flew the seeds of totara into it. It's now becoming a totara forest. There's over 100,000 hectares of land that is naturally becoming a totara forest. It's a brilliant thing to be watching. And this is where one of our members, Paul Quinnan, is doing his research and is doing trial extraction of totara, and it's working magnificently.
Paul's a great guy. And he applies that principle of reciprocity. You know, that's what we're talking about. We've got a reciprocal relationship with nature. If we look after nature, nature will look after us. And that's...
Can I just, because we're just about due to close, I want to finish with something that Kerry Allen has written in Forest and Bird, right? And we think of Kerry right now because she's undergoing enormous problems in her own life, and we should be praying for Kerry right now. But a very perceptive lady, I have to say. And let me read what she's written, which really rang a bell with us and Tane's treatise, and myself in particular. She says, my focus is probably multifaceted. In the Te Ao Māori arena, we conserve the environment by being able to use the environment. And that might be a different experience for some who see conservation as something you lock up and leave it. My belief is firmly held that we conserve the whenua and we conserve the taio by ensuring that we can use the taio. I think very perceptive. You know, really salute Kerry for making that, saying that to Forest and Bird, who are the prime lock up and leave it people.
Well, that's probably a brilliant note to end on. And I wonder whether we have just opened a massive can of worms with all this discussion that is basically a series of unresolved questions. The great news is that we have 6 more webisodes to go where we can drill into each one of these topics in greater depth, whether it's climate change, whether it's preserving forest from pests, whether it's continuous cover forestry. We have a terrific bunch of contributors lined up to talk who have also written for us on the website, the Aotato Ngahiri Pure Advantage website. So I would really like to take this moment to thank our guests for joining us, for firing in so many questions, and I do apologise that I've only got to a fraction of them. Please keep them coming. We will endeavour, you probably can't see them, but we have a team of crack helpers over there who are answering the questions for you in the text field. So thanks for joining us. Please join us again next week, every Tuesday, same time. And also would really like to thank our panelists, Professor Warwick Sylvester, Sheridan Ashford, and Ramona Radford. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you and wish you a very good evening.
Ite.
Thanks, everybody.
No, Morena.